Tabletop role-playing games have had a place in the video game market for about 20 to 30 years now, with some of the classics obviously being Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, and even Dragon Age. So then why does it feel like these games haven't improved? Now don't get me misconstrued, these games are not bad. At all. Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Neverwinter Nights, Dragon Age Origins, Divinity Original Sin, all of these games, Pillars of Eternity, they're all fantastic games, but have they gotten inherently better over the years? Sure, the graphics have gotten better, and I will give that the interfaces and the understanding of character statistics are presented a lot better in modern games, but has the writing and the mechanics of the games themselves actually improved? It's a weird question to answer because you look at Baldur's Gate 1 and you know that's based off of advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Some rules have been simplified and a lot of rules have been automated to make it work for a video game, but right from character creation, you are making an AD&D character to play in an AD&D world with its own unique story. Same with Neverwinter Nights for D&D 3rd edition and Baldur's Gate 3 for D&D 5th edition, as well as Solasta for the 5th edition OGL. But are these games inherently better than their predecessors? Is Baldur's Gate 3 better than Baldur's Gate 1 or 2? Unfortunately, I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3 because it's not fully out yet, so I can't really talk about that one. What I can talk about, though, is Pathfinder Kingmaker and Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and comparing those to Baldur's Gate 1, 2, and 3, well, not 3, I think is a completely fair argument, as they are very, very similar, they just have a different base rule set. And honestly, I don't think they've improved that much. I think Kingmaker, compared to Baldur's Gate 2, are pretty equal in quality. Sure, Kingmaker has more fully fleshed out 3D models and is a little bit prettier, but from a gameplay perspective, it's about the same. It's live action, you hit spacebar to pause, you select your abilities, you target those abilities, you hope you can kill the enemy before they kill you, you try not to go down so you can conserve resources. It feels very similar. But also, is this a bad thing? Just like the tabletop role-playing game that it stems from, these video games don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. In fact, it's almost easier for the developers not to, and instead capitalize on the fact that these video games are based on a medium where the same set of rules, or the same engine, can be used to tell a near infinite number of different stories. That's one of the main reasons Owlcat Games decided to make Wrath of the Righteous still a Pathfinder 1st edition game, even though Pathfinder 2nd edition was already out by the time it came out and was published. Sure, they could have waited an extra year or two and then made the entirety of Wrath of the Righteous in Pathfinder 2nd edition, but that would have taken an entirely new base engine. They would have needed to redesign everything. They would have needed to convert things from the original adventure path that the game is based off of, and it would have been a monstrously more difficult task compared to using the exact same engine as Kingmaker and using it for this story. So no, I honestly don't think the Owlcat games are better necessarily than Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, at least in regards to story and gameplay. Interface, graphics are about, they're better because they've advanced with the times, but even the music, I would argue Baldur's Gate is far more cinematic and memorable. This begs the question, going forward, especially with Pathfinder and D&D video games, are we going to see more of the same, or are they going to try and innovate them to separate the video games more from the tabletop elements while keeping the spirit there? I think the answer is yes, but. Yes, this is going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen with those licenses. I think Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons CRPGs like Baldur's Gate and Kingmaker are going to stay as true to the tabletop games as possible, even if it's to the detriment of the overall experience. This is because the fan base, the targeted audience for those games, is looking for an authentic replication of the tabletop experience. So even if it's not the best video game it could be, it will sell better because people will say it's just like Pathfinder. Kingmaker uses all those rules from Pathfinder. Those are in the book. I got the book with those rules. The Kingmaker outflank, I got the book. But we will see the CRPG genre expand with other less popular IPs. In fact, it's already happened and is continuing to happen. The best two examples of this are Divinity Original Sin and Pillars of Eternity. Both of these games have D&D as their root. They are based on an initiative system where people have an armor which can help reduce or negate damage, and if you run out of hit points, you lose all your health, and you have base statistics which qualify you to cast spells and equip weapons depending on your class. It's all there. In a vacuum, it sounds just like D&D, but they've changed things, especially things that only work in a video game landscape. You look at Divinity Original Sin and their action point system, which was incredibly innovative for the time it came out. When did that come out? Like 2013, 2014? And Pathfinder 2e came out about 2.5 years ago, and people were raving about how innovative the 3-action system was. Well, Divinity, years before PF2 even came out, took that a step farther, and they made it so your speed stat dictates how many action points you get per turn, and different abilities cost different amount of action points depending on how powerful they are, and you can do the same ability multiple times per turn if you have enough action points, except for some abilities which are only usable once per turn. And you see how when you try to explain it, it gets incredibly complicated, and trying to do any of that at a table would be so cumbersome. Imagine playing Pathfinder 2e, but because your character has an 18 in dexterity, they actually get 6 actions per turn instead of 3. Now, the attack action costs 2, and the move action costs 1, but if you want to sneak, it costs 2 actions, and you move at half your movement speed, or maybe you want to cast this spell, which costs 4 actions. No, that does not work at a table, because the bookkeeping is terrible. But when a game does 90% of it for you, it feels amazing. No longer do you need to worry about remembering how many points you get per turn. It's at a little bar at the bottom of your screen. You don't need to worry about remembering what each individual action and ability costs, because it's right there on the ability. When you hover over it, it'll show on the little action point bar how many it's going to cost. Elements and mechanics like this are exactly why these third-party video games like Divinity, like Pillars of Eternity, are going to continue evolving and slowly diverging farther and farther away from tabletop role-playing games like Pathfinder and D&D, and becoming much more of their own beast. And part of this is an amazing freedom for them to effectively make their own system. Larian Studios, the creators of Divinity and now Baldur's Gate 3, or at least Divinity Original Sin, basically made their entire own RPG system. You learn all of your abilities regardless of your class from skill books, but when you level up, you need to level up your level in each skill, so you can only learn certain skills when that skill is a certain level. It makes more sense if you play the game, I promise, but you can see why this would never work in a physical setting. But mechanics aside, I want to talk about another problem that really does plague these games, whether it's Baldur's Gate or Kingmaker, or even Pillars of Eternity to some amount, and that is the difficulty and inability to replicate the roleplay experience. You can replicate the game all you want, the mechanics, everything you want, but you cannot replicate the freedom of choice like you have at the D&D table. At the D&D table, if someone says, ha ha ha, you're locked in a cell, you can just cast any spell, you can reach into your bag, pull out a crowbar and pry the door off its hinges, anything like that. But in a video game, most of the time it's, Hold down left Alt to see that the bed lights up so you can click on it and find the key under the pillow. That is the only solution. And this is something that I don't know if we'll ever get in the mainstream games. You know, the ability to think about every possible outcome for every possible puzzle, for every possible situation in the game is just not feasible. And on top of that, it just wouldn't be worth committing the resources to for a company. You know, if Owlcat made Kingmaker, but they wanted to make every single encounter of that 60-hour RPG have 100 different solutions instead of one, that theoretically adds 100 times more work, which you just can't afford to do as a company who needs to release the game to pay your employees. Now, there is one exception to this. One singular exception to this rule of a tabletop video game that managed to give player freedom in the game. And they did it in a very clever way that they can never do again without feeling like they're rehashing themselves. And I've said it many times in this video, but that game is Divinity Original Sin. See, Divinity Original Sin, and Divinity Original Sin 2 to some lesser extent, gives the player so many unique tools, and a lot of them are incredibly fun to play with. Notably, teleportation. There are a lot of different spells and abilities in the game, whether you're a rogue who can throw down a smoke bomb and teleport 50 feet, or you're a wizard who can magically warp an object, or in the case of the first game, you get 2 colored pyramids, and this pyramid allows you, when activated, to teleport to the location of the other pyramid. Sounds really useful. They teach you how it works to get like across a gap or something. Because you can throw items in Divinity, so you can throw it 20 feet across a gap, activate it, and teleport to that pyramid. Throw it to your ally, they activate it, they teleport to you. Lots of cool puzzle solving. But it goes so far beyond puzzle solving, because there are so many times in that game where you'll see, oh, try to get through this gauntlet because there's like a fenced-in labyrinth, and you need to make it through these spike traps and flamethrowers and these enemies. But if you actually try, in a D&D setting, if the GM explains, yeah, it's all fenced in, it's the giant, like, pointed fences with like 6 inches between each one so you can't squeeze through. You as a player would say, can I reach through the bars? Like, you know, if they're 6 inches across, can I like reach my hand through? And the DM will probably go, yeah, but you can't fit your body. In Divinity, you can do exactly that. And if you take that pyramid and just reach through and drop it on the other side of the fence and teleport to it, you can skip the entire gauntlet, all the spike pits, all the flamethrowers, all the enemies, because you as a player were like, what if I just do this? Like, the game is not necessarily designed for you to do that directly, but it is implied to give you the freedom, and that is so satisfying. And the same goes for enemies. If you're a wizard with the ability to teleport something, you know, it might be implied that you can use this to teleport your barbarian over to the enemy so they don't have to waste actions moving. But guess what? You can also teleport the enemy into a pit of fire, into a poison cloud, and use them in combat in this really creative way that replicates a tabletop RPG experience where you as a player are allowed to get creative in how you solve problems. You know, oh, Lucky the dog is stuck on that pillar over there and you need to go underground through a tunnel and climb up underneath to get Lucky. No, use the spell as a rogue to throw down a smoke bomb and teleport over to that pillar, pick up Lucky, and teleport back. That is a valid solution, and it feels amazing. And I'll just say, Pillars of Eternity, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Neverwinter Nights, they have not been able to replicate that kind of freedom. Sure, it breaks the game. Sure, it makes some encounters completely trivial. But as a player, that feels amazing. And I think that will be the next logical evolution of tabletop RPG games, but not for mainstream ones. games like Owlcat's Pathfinder, games like Baldur's Gate 3. Granted, I haven't played it, and it is made by Larian, so maybe this is the case. Please let me know if I'm wrong. But I don't think the mainstream games are going to focus so hard on that freedom because they're focusing really hard on getting the exact mirrored mechanics right when replicating the tabletop game. But let me know what you think. Do you think these games are going to evolve to have more freedom of choice, or do you think they're going to evolve to just have more options taken from the actual mechanics of the tabletop games they're based off of? Let me know which games you prefer, too. I love talking about Pillars of Eternity, Divinity, Neverwinter Nights. They're all such great games. It's one of my favorite genres of game out there. So yeah, I just love talking about it. So leave a comment below. Shout out to my patrons for helping me out, and let me know if you're enjoying this sort of stream of consciousness content. It's some of the most fun I've had recording in a while. Hopefully you can feel that through my voice and my excitement when talking about this stuff, because it is something of a passion of mine, and I really like rambling. So that's all for me. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next time. Until next time, that was a terrible outro.